Blimey. This is one hell of a jam jar you got here.
Every morning, the House of Mystery contains demons, angels, elementals, magicians, wizards, apparitions, adult language, and discussions. If you're easily offended, do not enter the House of Mystery.
All right, then. On with the show.
All right, hello, welcome everyone to the House of Mystery, the John Constantine and Friends podcast. I am Michael, your host and curator. I welcome you to the House of Mystery. Watch your step. We don't want you tripping on the dead bodies, and the ground's also slippery from all the blood because the demon bisexual butler, my co-host, has not been doing his duties. Hello.
I'm sorry, I've been busy actually, unfortunately watching the ghost and getting preoccupied with that.
Yeah, that's right.
That's right.
I didn't know what to say. I'm like, yeah.
Yeah.
You always tell when I have nothing to say. Like, it's like, yeah.
Because you're just like speechless. It goes, yeah, I'm not surprised. I'm not surprised.
All right. So
Change your pants.
Change your pants. What does that mean? What is that? Oh, it's going to be one of those shows tonight. All right. So today we have a fun discussion to get through that we've been planning, that's been in the works for quite some time. I had put the Deadman trade paperback, Dark Mansion of Forbidden Love, on our list 2 years ago. And for whatever reason, we have continually just put it to the side and then covered other things. And I've been wanting to cover this for a long time because I read this when it first came out, I want to say in 2016, and I like it. I love it. I own a copy of it, and I've been wanting to talk about it since the conception of this show, but just for whatever reason, we get preoccupied, we get involved with doing other things, and finally I was like, okay, David, before the end of the year, we are finally going to do this. We're finally going to cover it. And I am living up to I'm a man of my word.
You're a man of a word.
I'm a man of my word. So in this episode, we are turning our attention to another member of the Justice League Dark and a longtime superhero who is so underrated and underutilized. And of course, I'm talking about Deadman. David, it's a travesty.
It is.
We talk about this a lot when it comes to all of our characters, and I'm trying to be objective, and I don't want people to like listen to the show and say, well, of course you think these characters are underrated and underutilized because they're all the characters that you love. But the ones that we always talk about, Constantine, Phantom Stranger, and Deadman, the three of them, especially Phantom Stranger and Deadman,
yes,
are so underrated and underutilized.
I was about to say also underutilized because, like, I get it. I mean, I've said it multiple times throughout our show and covering the darker side of DC.
Yeah.
A lot of writers get intimidated to write a story about those characters because they're so powerful. When you think about, or they just don't know how to translate their powers into something interesting.
Right.
And Phantom Stranger is one of those ones that I'm like going, he should have a lot of, writers knocking on his door and they want to write stories about him. But I get it. He's omnipresent. He's the type of figure that basically comes in, and if he shows up, that's the end game. No one can top him, not even Superman.
Yeah.
Deadman is like the same way because of his power set. He's able to jump into people's bodies and take them over and use them regardless if they want to or not. And also he gains access to whatever powers they have. So if, say, for example, he jumps into the body of Superman, well, he can make Superman. That means he has the strength of Superman.
Yeah.
That means he can do anything. And a lot of people feel that that's very overpowered. And how do you write a story around that?
Well, Sarah Vaughn seemed to be able to do it.
Dude, I was so happy to see Sarah Vaughn take this character because she is a comic book writer that I think doesn't get enough acclaim.
Yeah.
Because she's more or less regulated to let's just say certain comics that do not get mainstream attention. A lot of her comics tend to be for young adults. You have Jem. She writes a Barbie series and stuff like that. And
That's so strange, though.
and then she also, on the independent side, she focuses more on women related titles.
Mm-hmm.
And then all of a sudden, you look at her library, she gets this shot at Deadman. And I have to say, I'm glad they got her because she proved that she can be one of those writers that can do anything.
Well, interestingly, she doesn't throw away her style either, because she, you say that she tends to write titles designed for women. Now, I wouldn't say Deadman, Dark Mansion of Forbidden Love is a title for women, but it is a gothic horror. It's a gothic love story. So in that sense, she's definitely relying on her comfort zone, which is fine because it serves her well for this particular title. Now, as I said, we are going to be dissecting and breaking down the 2016 title, Deadman, Dark Mansion of Forbidden Love. Now, this was a limited series that ran from 2016 to 2017 and is currently available as a trade paperback. The entire story is written as a gothic horror, or perhaps you could possibly describe it as more of a gothic romance, which are basically similar. Gothic romance is a subgenre of gothic horror, and gothic horror is a subgenre of horror.
Yeah.
The entire thing is written through that lens. It is the aesthetic, the color palette, the tone, the themes. They're everything you would expect from a gothic romance as well as a gothic horror themed story. Either way, however you want to look at this, the writers took a relatively small concept and fleshed out an interesting tale of love, betrayal, and murder.
Yeah.
David, give me your initial thoughts without getting into spoiler areas, because I really want to advocate that people seek this out and read it if they have not.
Oh, no, absolutely. I agree with you there. This is one of those titles that me and you have covered where we come across a title that we don't want to give any spoilers because, just like you said, we want our audience to go and get this title and read it and give the writer and the artist the praise they deserve.
Yep.
Because that's how we can support them. You go out and fight in the title. This is one of those.
And also, we want Deadman to track. We want him to trend, because if we keep getting sales that are Deadman titles, maybe finally DC will get their head out of their ass and say, oh, hey, look it, we've been sitting on a gold mine this whole time.
Oh, yeah. And I honestly think a story like this can easily translate into other media, meaning I can easily see this title being transferred into a TV show.
Oh, an HBO Max
or
event series.
HBO event series. Can you imagine that?
Oh, yeah.
And especially when you read this title, I think it's worthy of that. I think the story that Sarah Vaughn put together is very, very well done, because I appreciate when people try to say, I want to do a gothic storytelling, say like Guillermo del Toro, when he does something like that. And it is some of the best storytelling ever that you can ever see. However, 80% of the time, hell, 90% of the time, people don't get gothic storytelling because they just whittle it down into something so simplistic as it's a love story.
Flanagan, I would consider some of Flanagan's work. Mike Flanagan,
The
Haunting series he did for Netflix, that definitely leans into the gothic.
Oh, easily.
Horror stories.
Easily. But if you think about it, they're like the outliers, because there's been so many attempts to try to do a gothic storytelling, and people just don't understand the genre completely.
Yeah.
And don't get the story tones and the elements that are needed.
What needs to be involved, the elements. We always talk about genre conventions. That's part of it. You have to understand what belongs in a gothic story, a gothic horror story.
And you know what I appreciate most is like Sarah Vaughan's story, she veers away from the trope of basically let's just put them in Victorian times.
Yeah.
Do you notice that?
Yeah.
This is set in present day. And you could say that basically you couldn't tell it was set in present day until they actually do a lot of like their stories where they show the characters
around chapter 3. I want to say is when you realize, okay, you're in contemporary times.
You're in
when
contemporary
the lead
times.
character goes into town.
Yeah. And it's like I'm like going, thank you, because it's one of those tropes that I think gets overused by writers who think I'm going to write a gothic storytelling, so I'm just going to put this in the Victorian times and voila, it's a gothic storytelling.
Yeah. Well, traditional setting of gothic horror, yes, was the Victorian era. That's where it originated, but it's long surpassed that location. Now it's just about making sure you're using the right conventions, you utilizing the iconography that's become synonymous with the gothic horror. If you know those things, then you can probably do yourself a favor. That's not what I was going to say. Then you'll probably put together a strong gothic horror piece that's not anchored to the Victorian era, per se.
Yeah, exactly.
You just got to understand the property you're working in, or the genre you're working in. And not everyone understands that. Like it's like when people say something's a Western, like, oh, this is totally a Western. I'm like, why? Because it's an 1850. Like that's
exactly.
Just because it's an 1850 doesn't mean it's a Western.
Yeah.
Like, is it taking place in that time period? Sure. But is it a Western film? It's only a Western film if you're utilizing the genre elements that go with it. And the same thing could be said about the gothic horror. And that takes us into our discussion, because I will say that Sarah Vaughan just killed it on all levels, not just the writing, but just the ability to work within this genre so well and not fall into the pitfalls sometimes that happens when you are working in a genre. Many times you fall into those cliches that people come to expect because, hey, you know what? Well, I got to have this because that's a part of a gothic horror. But she finds a way to utilize what you would expect in a gothic horror, but also invert it slightly to work for story purposes. There's intrigue, there's wonderment, there's a mystery, and of course there's a murder at the heart of all that. And because of that, this is actually not just a well-written piece. It's fun and it's immersive. It pulls you in because of Sarah Vaughan's ability to tell a story.
Yes. And that's the important part with gothic storytelling. The storytelling aspect is so key to me because you have to make it interesting. And one of the biggest things for me when I'm reading any gothic story is the mystery element.
Mm-hmm.
You have to suck me in and basically make me constantly be wondering, where are you going? What's going on? Okay, that just like what you said, that sense of wonderment.
Yeah.
And from page 1 to the very last issue, Sarah Vaughan had me hooked because I'm like going, she had a really great story being told. She had really great elements. And on top of that, she's able to use Deadman properly.
Mm-hmm.
Deadman is actually like the one element that I think gets missed about Deadman is the fact that he is, at the end of the day, his powers isn't just jumping into people's bodies. It's the fact that he is smart. He is actually a thinker. So he thinks his way out of things.
Yeah. So just so that people have a better handle on what truly gothic horror is, here's a little synopsis from a horror website that I'll share on the website version of our podcast when the show goes live. So he writes, or she writes, on a hill, there's a house. In the attic, there's a ghost. On the moors, there's a wolf. In the woods, there are monsters. In the house, there's a lonely woman. Those lines right there literally perfectly encapsulate the gothic horror.
Yeah.
Then she goes on to say, pinning down what precisely makes a story Gothic horror is a tricky task. Is it the house? To be certain, I have never seen a Gothic horror story that doesn't have a location as a primary character and often an antagonist.
Yes.
Is it the woman? It seems likely that there are one or two stories that fall under the genre that center on a non-female character. Is it terrifying? Is it a terrifying sense of foreboding? Well, now we are onto something. So that's a nice little tone she sets to really encapsulates the Gothic horror. Because if you could capture a genre in just a few short sentences, I think she did the trick.
Oh, absolutely. I think she did. I think she did a masterful job.
And as you read through Deadman, Dark Mansion of Forbidden Love, you'll see many of those aspects. So the official synopsis. Deadman, Dark Mansion of Forbidden Love is a hauntingly gothic comic packed full of suspense and atmosphere, whilst the storyline is predictable and nothing original. Who wrote this synopsis?
Who wrote the synopsis?
I wouldn't say it's predictable.
Exactly. I don't think it's predictable at all.
And nothing original? Okay. I think that's also in your interpretation because, okay, we're going to get into... I fuck that synopsis. I'm not even going to read it. But now I have to address this predictable and nothing original. When it comes down to simply the plot, the sequence of events, if you will, then yes, you can say there's nothing original. But what is being said? What makes a story truly appealing has less to do with the plot itself. As we've said numerous times, Dave, on these shows, but it has more to do with what a story is saying. That's where originality can blossom and bloom. It's within the unsaid. At the core of this story, in particular, and its central theme, that more or less serves as a foundation, is the notion of letting go.
Yes.
That's the main primary theme of this story. And Vaughn interweaves this thematic aspect into every portion of the narrative.
And I was really surprised about that too, is because I'm like going, how is she going to make everything tie together? And then as you're reading along, you begin to realize all of the aspects, all of the little threads and little side stories that she takes for each character, they all weave together.
Yeah.
And I'm like going, by the end of it, I was like going, holy crap, she even tied in the character Bernice, who's the partner in crime of Deadman in this issue. And I actually found a more decent summary of the thing if you want.
Yeah, go for it. That's fine.
Okay, this one says, Boston Brand is a dead man walking. More than walking, actually, his uncanny ability enables him to float, fly, and seize control of the bodies of the living. He's no mere ghost. He's something more powerful, more heroic. He is Deadman, and he's about to meet Bernice, a living woman with powers of her own. Bernice's complicated life and loves have driven her to the haunted hills of a sprawling mansion known as Glencourt Manor. It's a place where the forces of darkness are known and unknown. They gathered at the house where the person with Bernice's powers to talk to the dead could accomplish great or possibly evil, incredible things.
Yeah. Yeah, that was a much better one.
That's a much better one.
Yeah. Okay, so let's bring it back just a bit to the whole letting go theme. So from this theme, which is the spine of this entire story, from this theme, we understand that the metaphors that are created, or I should say, from this theme, we can understand the metaphors. That's a better way of saying that. We can understand the metaphors that are created, and through that, we then start to see the relevancy and the substance.
Yes.
For example, the ghost that is haunting the mansion, Adelia, I believe is what her name was, is holding on to the past. Classic ghost thing, right?
Yeah.
And his anger, and because of this, they're unable to see the truth that is right in front of their face. And as a result, they are trapped. This, of course, has greater meaning for the reader through the writer's use of, as I was saying, of key iconographic elements of Gothic fiction. We are able to interpret meaning and narrative intent. This is where it is original, despite that terrible synopsis I started to read. There's also a secondary theme that is more closely aligned with loneliness. That's a big part. And this is where Deadman comes in specifically.
Exactly.
Many of these themes are more or less about him. And that's the beautiful thing. Now, I love that Vertigo title that we covered last year with The Phantom Stranger.
Yes.
My biggest problem was that, even though I loved it, if I had to gripe about something, it seemed to be far less about him and more about the secondary character. And,
Yes.
and it served that story's purpose. I mean, it worked just fine. Whereas this, superficially, you can say, well, Deadman is not really the main character. He may not be the main driving force, but literally everything's about him.
Yes.
It all can go right back to him. Now, of course, the lead characters, Adelia as well as Bernice, yeah, you could say it's about them. It is, but this is titled Deadman. Mm-hmm. And ultimately, all of their actions and the motions they're going through and what's being said about them, that's the depressing thing about it, is they're really saying something about Deadman.
They're saying something about Boston.
Yes.
Because especially with the story of Adelia, without giving any away spoilers, when you get to I think it's the second issue, one of my favorite parts is her discussion with Boston about the afterlife. And then you begin to see that this is tied to Boston too. His feelings are being tied to Adela's story right now. And that's why I thought was really, really cool was like, I kept wondering throughout the entire thing, how is Sarah doing this? She's able to actually tie all her characters together nice and neat. Meanwhile, she's still able to actually give their own little story arcs.
They each have their own arc, yeah.
They have their own arcs, but they all share a very common thread.
Yeah.
And she's able to do this without it being too messy.
It's not messy, but that's the reason why, if you want to write something good, people of Earth out there, find a theme.
Find a theme.
And use that theme to keep all of your characters connected.
And you realize she tackled the theme so differently from character to character.
Yeah.
That by the end of it, you realize what the whole story is about, but you see it from so many different points of view.
It's definitely from other people's perspectives. But during those last few pages, when all of it comes together and you realize it's just a fucking sad story for Deadman.
Yeah.
I mean, you get the idea that he's lonely, that he's trapped against his will. He's forced to live within the in-between worlds of the living and the dead.
Yes.
Not really knowing who or what he is anymore. So we get a story kind of steeped in existentialism as well.
And do you realize that even the villain, the quote-unquote villain of the book, is the same crisis?
It's a manifestation of being trapped,
not
letting go,
not being able to let go.
Yeah.
And he's forever tied to this curse.
Yeah.
And it's like everyone is tied to not being able to let go.
That's the ultimate villain right there. So not only is it a theme, but I would even say the theme itself is also the antagonistical force.
Mm-hmm.
That's the pushback against our protagonist, which is an interesting way to do it because, yeah, we do have a physical villain, a tangible villain, but that tangible villain is nothing more than the manifestation. Now, I'm not giving away spoilers here. I'm just talking about metaphorically. And in terms of writing, I mean, that villain is essentially just the manifestation of the idea itself of letting go. So bringing it back to the existentialism aspect just for a second, certainly Deadman has purpose. So I don't want to say he is existential because Deadman does have a sense of purpose. He understands what he's supposed to do. He doesn't really know why. That's always been kind of like elusive. Certain stories have grounded it. Those stories usually kind of suck. The best stories usually keep his ultimate purpose a little elusive. I know some of the New 52 brought greater context to his purpose, which I never was really about. So there is a sense of existentialism as well working with those other themes. And certainly Deadman has purpose, but the story alludes to the fact that he's trapped in an endless cyclical existence. In order to strengthen these themes, there are also additional thoughts pushed forward, such as remorse, regret, fear of loss, holding on to pain, all of which help to underscore the primary theme of letting go, because those are all products of not letting go. Remorse. If you live in a perpetual state of remorse and guilt, that is not letting go.
Not letting go.
Regret. Again, fixating on something in the past that you've done. Fear of loss. You got to let those fears go. You got to let it go. Holding on to pain. These are all elements that psychologically and mentally hold people back. I mean, a lot of problems with people's mental illness and anxiety, a lot of that has to do with individuals who are trapped in the past.
Which is hilarious because, like, when you get to the very end, and again, I'm not going to give any spoilers because I love all the elements that you're talking about. And then one particular one that happens in the end, particularly with Adela, where you find out about her emotional state is what is keeping her here.
Yeah.
And in order for her to move on, she has to let go. And that moment in the story is so cool because it's a cool take on the concept of a vengeful ghost. And I'm like going, when you get to that, I'm like going, God damn, I would love to see this type of storytelling happen more often because this is how you do a unique storytelling.
It's all metaphor and allegory.
Metaphor and allegory.
Yeah.
And
it's really smart.
That's how you tackle a ghost story.
Yep.
This is a perfect ghost story.
Yeah. And the thing is, and I believe you were mentioning this a few moments ago, the best thing about all of this, because I threw out all those words, remorse, regret, fear of loss, holding on to pain, letting go. There may be people out there that say that's a lot to throw into a story, and it is, but it's all pretty seamless for the most part. And the reason why it works is because all those elements are sewn together, and then they're used to govern every single one of our characters. That's what every single one of our characters have in common. All of those elements, which ultimately, David, it gives the narrative a unified cohesion. And that answers your question, Dave, when you said it's amazing. Well, maybe not a question, but your statement. It builds on your statement of it's amazing that all of this can happen with all of these different characters.
Yes.
And that's the reason why you assign pretty much each of these characters similar themes, and then before you know it, the story can write itself if you have a general idea of the direction you want to go. So there's some sad stuff in this book.
There is.
I mean, a lot of gothic horror tends to be sad. A lot of it has to do with loneliness, as I have been talking about. There's this thought that we become lonely because we essentially trap ourselves because of our desire or need to hold on to the past.
Yes.
That we are the jailer of our own self-made prisons. This is also where the existential aspects come into play. And in doing so, they build on, and this is very important to me, whenever you're dealing with a character like this, in doing all of this, they build on the mythos of Deadman as well. The ghost in the book is used, Adelia, is used to parallel Deadman's own experiences. And while he's assisting the ghost, Adelia, to learn to let go so she can move on from this plane of existence, he's unable to. And yes, you could say, well, he's the Deadman. That's his job. He can't move on. But that's sad. That's the point.
Well, that's
that the very rules that govern his character from the beginning. He lives somewhere in between life and death as a ghost, and yet we're led to believe that perhaps the real powerful aspect is that it smacks you in the face because you realize you get the idea. Let me backtrack. I'm getting too excited here. That's what happens. So that's the saddest part about it. When you really start focusing on what's being done and how they're building out the mythos of Deadman. The most saddest part about this, and the real powerful aspect that smacks you in the face when you realize it, is you get the idea that the writer was saying that he too, Deadman, is trapped because of something he's unable to let go.
Yes.
So that's the interesting part, because I do not believe, and I've read a lot of Deadman, I do not believe they've ever used that idea to explain why he is trapped between the living and the dead, and why he is the Deadman. Yes, you have the idea of, who's that goddess?
It's not
From the very first issue of Strange Adventures.
Is it Krishna?
Yes.
I forget.
Kushna.
Kushna.
Like, yes, you have that, but going beyond that and looking at things from more of a metaphysical sense, perhaps it wasn't just penance for his life.
Yeah.
Perhaps he could actually retire the Deadman persona if he let go of something.
And that's the thing that I really...
Did you get that too?
Oh, absolutely. Especially in the very end. The very end, which this is probably the closest thing I'm going to give to a spoiler. The very end, the last line of the book, I thought was so poetic, because you see Deadman flying off, and Sarah Vaughan uses the line, "A dead man who, when he hears a cry for help, does not hesitate to answer the call."
It felt very much like Gary Oldman from A Dark Knight. The ending, the last page, that narration, I love it.
And in a way, it's saying that Deadman is stuck here because he has this constant drive that he has something to do. He doesn't know what it is. He's just like what you said, he's trapped here because he can't let go of something.
That's the idea they're going with. The idea is he doesn't even know what he's supposed to let go.
He just waits to hear the cry for help, and then goes to help.
Dude, it's so powerful because, Dave, that's why I love what they did with that. I'm glad you caught that, because it's sad as hell, yes.
It's sad as hell.
But that's why you had the whole Adelia aspect of this story pretty much voicing and telling you what's going on with Deadman. If you know what to look for, it, as I said at the top of the show, it's about Deadman.
It's about Deadman.
And where they have that moment, I want to say during chapter 4 or chapter 5, where they say that Adelia is unable to even recall certain aspects. Like, that's a classic ghost thing.
Yes.
They're trapped in a moment. They're not sure sometimes that they're even dead. They relive certain aspects. Well, they definitely brought that idea to the forefront with intent and purpose, because Adelia, like a lot of ghost stories, is unable to recall how she died, if she's even alive or dead. There's parts of her life that she doesn't even remember. She barely remembers her own name. I believe she said at one point. They are pushing this idea because they're alluding to the fact that Deadman himself doesn't quite recall things either.
Yeah, because time... The thing I love also that she plays around
You're
with...
spot on. I know what you're going to say.
...is she plays around with the notion that for ghosts, time is not a non-factor.
It's irrelevant.
It's irrelevant.
Which is part of the insanity.
Yes. And that's what I loved about when they played around with that, with the story of Adelia and Boston. And then Boston's like kind of looking at Adelia and going, you know, I understand where you're coming from, because
it's almost like he's afraid to admit that
he's afraid to admit it,
because he doesn't even remember certain things.
Because to Boston Brand, for people who know the character, Boston Brand was selected by Kushnu. I want to say, did I say that right? Kushnu, I think. Kushna.
It's an Indian god, right?
He was selected by a god to be their avatar so that they can be the quote-unquote spirit of vengeance for them.
Yeah.
That is why he was chosen. So to Boston, if you think about it, that's his only motivation. But he doesn't really understand anything else. He doesn't know, like, okay, you mean to tell me that basically...
Rama Kushna. Yeah, Rama.
And he only answers when needed. Like, if someone calls, the Deadman shows up. And it's one of those things that I think gets lost in a lot of superhero storytelling because people take for granted, hey, it's Superman. He can fly around the world in a speeding bullet. He can teleport magically. And with Deadman, I like the fact that they play around with the fact that his cycle is just never ending. He will constantly answer someone's call for help.
Yeah.
That is a good thing. But when you actually think about it, especially in regards to the story, it's just like what you said. It's sad.
Yeah, well, yes. And it would feel weird if they did a story like this and Deadman is saying it himself. Oh, I'm lonely and I'm trapped and I don't remember things. So they build a story like this to vocalize what Deadman's possibly going through and also filling in the gaps, explaining certain things, but also keeping the mystique, the factor that makes Deadman such an interesting character. I don't think we want the light to be shown on his entire story and to understand why he can't just die.
Yes.
Other than the fact that, because I do believe it's way more than just simply Ramakrishna. So they're playing with this idea that he also has to let go. And if he were to realize that, perhaps he could rest as well.
In peace.
And as you had mentioned time. And that's definitely a big part and a very big part of this story, because part of human existence is how we perceive time. Our minds assimilate the passing of events in a linear fashion, right?
Yes.
However, based on various accepted theories, time is relative. The rate at which time passes depends on your frame of reference. Without a frame of reference, you lose track of your own existence.
Yes.
And in The Mansion of Love, this thought is connected to losing one's identity. So the lines of dialogue that emphasize this, Dave, because I do have some proof here. First line of dialogue, it feels like I've been dead forever, and it feels like no time has passed at all. Now, this is a great way to not only underscore the crippling effect of living in the past, but also the aspect of not letting go.
Yes.
Also, it has a way to better understand Deadman's existential existence. With that one line of dialogue, all those things become clear. The second line of dialogue that has more to do with our identity and how the crippling effects of being stuck in the past prevents us from seeing the persons we are in the present is this line here. A faint remembrance of a dead man who is rarely seen or heard or recognized for himself, who questions his existence but not his purpose. I mean, that's a powerful line.
Yeah, that is. I
mean, I got chills. That is good.
Heck of a writing talent that Sarah Vaughan has.
Yeah,
where she can actually weave the use of her words.
And not only is it flowery, meaning poetic, but it actually means something. Many times when people try to write flowery, that's all it is. It's poetic and it really doesn't mean anything, and then they can't explain it. Well, it's abstract and an artist doesn't explain himself. The truth is, you don't fucking know what you wrote. You just put a bunch of words together that sounded nice. This is all of that, but also has extreme purpose on so many different levels. I need Sarah Vaughan to write more Deadman.
Oh, absolutely. I would love her to tackle like an anthology of Deadman and tell like tales of Deadman going through, quote unquote, helping people.
Yeah.
And tying it all about like her theme of not being able to let go would be an absolute amazing story. When the thing I wrote down on my notes that this might be a lot of people who are listening to us and are big comic book fans might think I'm overblowing Sarah Vaughan's talent by comparing her to this particular title. But honestly, the way she uses Deadman and the ability to actually give us an insight into Deadman's psyche about what does it mean to be dead? What does it mean to deal with the afterlife? What does it mean to actually be the Deadman? Is very similar to how I saw All-Star Superman. When All-Star Superman, which is one of the greatest Superman stories ever told, was able to tell a story that basically showed the perspective of Superman and let the audience understand what does it mean to be Superman. This is what Sarah Vaughn is toying with Deadman. This is her all-star Superman. And I feel that basically she should be able to be, DC should give her a blank check to be given a Deadman title. Give her a Deadman title and tell her, have fun at. Go for it.
She would knock it out the park.
And I think she would. I mean, really do.
She's also a progressive. You can tell by some of the things that she had included in her issue.
But you know what was genius? It never took away from the story.
It didn't distract. Because
it did not distract.
That's the problem nowadays with a lot of. I feel like we're in an era of people. See, in years past, because art has always been used to push change,
yes.
right? That's nothing new. And when people bitch and complain about those types of things, it's kind of silly. So when I bring things like this up, I'm looking at it from a different perspective, meaning in years past, we would have artists who wanted to share their feelings on something. They wanted to put together a bit of social commentary. In today's environment, we have political activists trying to masquerade as artists. And that's why we have a lot of really, and I don't use this word often because I just hate it. It's overused. But it's the reason why we get a lot of woke garbage, where it's just a bunch of agenda, and not anything meaningful. There's nothing meaningful being said. It's just, oh, I get it. It's Tom Taylor-ness, you know, like in his new Superman title, which there is no substance to it. It's just an agenda.
Yeah.
So with something like this, there's a non-binary woman. Well, oh Jesus, I just fucked up. Is that an oxymoron?
Non-binary person.
There's a non-binary person, and the way they do it is really interesting because one of my biggest pet peeves, and I've said this before, when the writer creates this, let's say within the story world, the diegesis, if you will. A lot of writers go with the assumption that, you know what, there is an assumption in the world that everyone just knows your pronouns.
Yes.
And that's fucking stupid. Especially when you're dealing with characters like John Constantine or even Deadman. If there's someone walking around and you've never met them before and you immediately say, oh, hey, go talk to them over there. How do they know what their pronoun is?
Exactly.
They don't. And I hate when writers do that. And they're trying to prove a point that is no different than a he, she, which, yes, theoretically it isn't. But also, how do you assume that they are they and them? We can assume he and her and him and her based on appearance for the most part, right?
Yeah.
With them and they, how? So when writers just take that assumptive approach with their characters, it's fucking stupid. It's weak as hell.
Well, and the thing I really liked about it, it didn't become a big thing. And I love the banter between Bernice and Boston, because Boston called Sam. Sam's the non-binary. Yes.
Boston Brand referred to Sam as her. And the other character, Bernice, corrected him and said, actually, they go by they. And that was it. I'm like, okay, thank you. Because how would Deadman know this?
And Boston doesn't make a big deal about it, which is amazing because naturally a person would be, oh, okay.
Yeah. And I'm okay with that. That works. So
it worked.
So it's the whole thing. And I would also say there's definitely some very strong feminist notes. And I've kind of held back saying that because I don't want any comic book readers out there kind of groan and say, oh, that's the last fucking thing I want to read. Feminism has gotten a bad rap of late. It's been thrown into the agenda woke bullshit, but feminism isn't always what people think it is.
Yeah.
But there are definitely strong characters in this comic that are women. Mm-hmm. The women are pretty much front and center. But the entire thing is about Deadman.
is about Deadman. But also, like, the thing that I really did enjoy was, like, Bernice herself is a strong, well-written
Don't say it.
female.
Don't say female lead. Whoa.
Yeah.
I hate that.
But, like, the thing is, like, it never became part of the story.
No, it's
you
just
notice
it's
that-
just a thing.
Yeah.
I am reading it as a feminist piece.
As a feminist piece.
Yeah.
But, like, when you read it by itself, Bernice and Boston are just two partners in this story. And it's almost like gender has no issue with it.
Well, no, it doesn't. But you're right. But it is a love story.
It is a love story.
I would say between the non-binary and the woman, and then also Boston Brand and the ghost.
But if you
there's
think
definitely something there as well.
And what helps it is the theme that she chose. She chose to go
Absolutely.
with.
And
is
also the
theme of not
genre.
being able to let go.
And also the genre, gothic horror,
Yes.
gothic romance, all of it works.
Because if you think about it, I mean, like, an atypical love story, yeah, there is an element of having to let go or having to accept something. Those are elements in any typical love story. And the way that she tackled it, because I'm trying to be really careful, not giving away too many spoilers,
Yeah,
I thought was actually really clever.
it was.
And I
I
could see your point that basically a lot of, at first, I was thinking the same thing as I was getting into, I think it was issue 2, where I was like, okay, is this going to be kind of like a feminist piece, or is this going to be like a women are the
This isn't women rule and
Yeah.
boys drool
And
and,
boys
they're
drool.
all rapists. Like that's not what I'm talking about when I
Yeah.
say feminism. That isn't feminism. That's
not
bullshit.
feminism. That's bullshit. But like after the second issue, I began to realize, no, Sarah's actually taking this story and kind of saying, I can write a love story that doesn't have to focus on gender.
Yeah.
And that in itself, I applaud. I'm like going, yes.
We need more.
Well done.
If the industry is set on more progressive inclusion, this is how you do it.
Yes. This is, in comparison, like you brought up the dreaded name that has been kind of like the Voldemort of
Why
our
do we
show.
got to bring him up every show? I hate that
know.
I did it. You know, don't
But-
even use his name, please.
But the fact that when you look at the parallel of two writers tackling, quote unquote, the same subject matter, TT, basically for him, he's like, oh, look at me, pat me on the shoulder. I'm doing such a good job, right? I'm a good boy. I'm a good boy. And I'm I'm going to take this character and I'm going to force him in this box. Force him into the box. Well, here, Sarah's like,
It's
going,
just natural.
no.
It's more naturalistic.
I'm going to make it part of my story.
It just is.
It just is.
Yeah.
Never once did Sarah force characters into boxes. She let the characters dictate her story.
There you go. Yep. That's a good way of saying
That is
it.
the difference between TT and Sarah Vaughn.
Yeah.
Is like TT he'll destroy his story because he wants to prove an agenda. Sarah's like going, no.
Well, because he's not sincere.
Yeah.
He's
that's the thing. Sarah's sincere about this story.
He's a twat whistle. I don't know why. I fucking hate him.
One day he's gonna like listen to us like basically go, "Aw."
David, I think it needs to become a game, like a drinking game. Like every time we mention his name,
I think our
the listeners got to take 2 or 3 shots.
I think the listeners would be drunk by the time they end of a show.
Yeah. And maybe we should also drink every time we mention his name. So perhaps we'll learn our lesson and try to do a show that just forget it. Just,
My blood pressure, I'm trying to work and keep my blood pressure low. Every time we bring him up, my blood pressure starts boiling.
okay, Dave. So for the most part, the general critical reception has been favorable for Deadman, Dark Mansion of Forbidden Love. It has an average of about 8.2. Issue 1 was 8.5. Issue 2 was graded as an 8.1, and issue 3 was an 8.3.
Yes.
And this is, of course, coming from the go-to rating system for comic books, and that's Comic Book Roundup. I would actually, you know what? Let me just give you my RMD score, Dave. I would give this a 90%. I would give it a 90%. It's definitely higher than an 8.5, which I think if we were to translate that over, that would be an 85% for us. It's definitely above that.
Oh, absolutely. The funny part is I am exactly the same score as you, which shows how good this title is when me and you actually agree.
Yeah, and you're not
when there's no variance.
Trying to just blow it for blow's sake.
For blow's sake. This is legitimately a really excellent comic that people should pick up because it is an example of really great elements that me and you have been hearkening for.
And I will say, definitely get the trade paperback too, right, Dave? Don't do digital with this because you got to have your hands on. That's something we didn't talk about. The colors.
Oh my God!
The texture. It's so good. It's one of those comics you need to have.
Absolutely. Even with, I put here my favorite cover out of the 3-issue series was the third cover. And the art on the third cover is just gorgeous because it hooks on to the theme of the entire story. Once you actually start understanding it and you look at that cover with Deadman cradling the ghost of Adele and just standing there staring at the audience. Mm-hmm. And meanwhile, you have the Gothic castle in the background and you have Bernice front and center in kind of like the gigantic overwatching element.
Yeah.
That is like a classic Gothic book cover.
Yeah, you got to have the copy. Right now, it's on Amazon for $7.23. It's on sale.
It's worth it.
I purchased it several years back. It was like $19. So it dropped. I believe Amazon is running some deals right now. So the paperback, the physical copy, you can get for $7.23 currently on Amazon. I will drop a link on our site just so that people can find it fairly easy. Yeah, there are some images in here, Dave. I'm not really. I've been kind of against getting nerd tattoos. You know, like geek-eccentric tattoos, just because that seems like to be the thing now. Everyone gets, geek tattoos, and they're great. I mean, one of our hosts on the network, his entire arm, his 2 arms, sleeves of geek shit, and it looks great. Just for me, it's not my thing, but there is some imagery in this comic that I would not mind having on my body.
Oh yeah, and that comes down to, I'm glad we had have at least a little time to actually talk about him. Is Lan Medina?
Yeah.
Because Lan Medina, my brother from the Philippines.
Oh, is he a Filipino?
Yeah, he's a Filipino comic book artist. He does amazing work.
I don't think I've seen any of his other work, but judging based on Mansion of Love, it's fucking solid.
Well, Lan Medina actually did like some of the, if you're familiar with Fables, which started in Vertigo and everything.
Yeah.
He worked on Fables.
Oh, okay.
And he does amazing art. He also, one of my favorite Marvel series that he did was Punisher Max.
Oh, okay. No, I am familiar with his work then.
And Lan Medina he hit it off the park. The way he actually used Boston Brand and some of the panels I loved was how he played around with the notion that Boston's a ghost. So technically, in certain points, we shouldn't be actually able to see Boston's real form.
Right.
So all of a sudden, he'll play around with shadows, and you'll only see like the outline of Boston. And I'm like going, that's an artist who's understanding the character that he's drawing.
Yeah. There's an image. I forget what page it's on, but it's where the villain makes their appearance for the first time, and you have that merging of the ghost, Deadman, and the bad whatever.
Oh yeah.
And they create this circular, almost like a ring.
Yes, where they show the time passing.
I want that as a tattoo.
Yes.
That image is so cool.
It is,
and it says so much. Very powerful imagery.
One of my favorite ones that I thought he caught really well was actually, as funny as it sounds, didn't even have the quote unquote ghost characters in it. One of my favorite panels he did was the splash page of Bernice looking at the castle, and it's like all you see is her silhouette.
Yeah, I know what you're talking about.
And it's like just this perfect gothic image of a woman staring at this foreboding castle.
Yeah.
Surrounded by like forest. And I'm like going, he understands what gothic imagery. This is how you show it.
I wonder what the sales were on this. I wish there was a place I could go to.
From what I understand, this is the reason why I want our audience to go out there and support this book. Is from what I understand, this did not sell well.
That's a shame. God damn it.
Because people didn't pick it up. People were looking at it and weren't the interest in it wasn't there.
This is why we can't have nice things.
Exactly. And
maybe if they put Batman as the love interest, it would have sold.
You want to know a funny story? When I was
They're doing a spinoff called Deadman
Dark Knight
of Forbidden Love.
No, but like when I went to a comic book shop to actually try to see physical copies of this, the comic book shop owner actually told me, yeah, he had a bunch of them. And he said that he read the book and he loved it. And he kept telling people, pick it up. You guys got to pick it up. It's a good story.
Yeah.
Everyone constantly would say, oh, it's not Batman though. What's Deadman? And it's like, Deadman's part of the DC universe.
See, that's when I want to be Iago from Aladdin. You know when Iago like takes the crackers and shoves them down the Sultan's throat? If some asshole said, "Who's Deadman?" I'd take the pages and just shove them down his fucking throat. That's fucking Deadman, you motherfucker.
I'm picturing you.
Or I just put the page up. I put the page up and be like, and punch right through the page. What an asshole.
Yeah.
All right. We got to wrap this show, David, on that terrible, violent note.
It's okay. It's needed.
All right. I want to thank everyone for listening. Be sure to go to our Patreon page. If you go to patreon.com/RainManDigital, you can pledge $1. That's it. $1 a month or $10 for the year. And you will gain access to our Oblivion Bar podcast, which is basically a mini version of this show. And we typically get into things that we don't have time to get into on our regular show. So if you want to help support us and keep us alive, we did cut back on a couple of our shows this year due to network cutbacks, and we do want to bring them back. I enjoy doing the show, but also financial reasons, so please help us. We need Patreon subscribers. Thank you, David.
Thank you.